Hi everyone and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet and welcome to another episode of The Apostates. I'm here today with someone that I have been wanting to speak to for quite a while, someone whom I actually didn't really interact with before very much. But this person is someone who I think is very important to the rise of ex-Muslims, the rise of apostasy, and what ex-Muslims do, where they gather, where they find a voice. I'm speaking to Sarah Haider, who is an ex-Muslim woman, who is an activist, who is who leads Ex-Muslims of North America, a very important organization when it comes to ex-Muslims. But as always, I would like to leave the words to her. Hi, Sarah. How are you doing?
Really good. How are you?
Good. Fantastic. Thank you. Was that right? Did I introduce you?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was good.
Okay.
And thank you for the compliments. I appreciate it. So that's more or less what people need to know about me, I guess. My story, my ex-Muslim story, I think is not as fascinating as some of the people who've been through some serious abuse. But it was a very intellectual journey. I started questioning the tenets of the belief directly, the foundations of the belief directly. And I've said a few times that I became an atheist before I became an ex-Muslim. I realized that I didn't believe in God, and there was a lot of logical contradictions with the whole idea of this kind of deity. So I recognize that this means that I didn't believe in the Abrahamic God, and it means I'm not a Muslim. So the particulars of Islam that bother a lot of people and push them towards questioning the religion were not really as influential in my leaving the faith. After I left it, I started examining some of those particulars a little bit more, like the treatment of women and homosexuals and all, and freedom of speech and everything. And that affects me a lot more now. And that's part of the reason that I participate in this way and try and open up discourse in the Muslim world, because I do think that those particulars matter. They affect our world, they affect our reality. But for my personal journey, it wasn't as important. I was looking into a lot of philosophy at the time that I left religion. And I remember it as being a really positive experience in a lot of ways. Like, I'm a very ideological person, in that I think about something, and then this is what I believe in. Now this is what I'm going to do. It affects my actions very directly, and I try to be very deliberate about how I move in the world. So, after leaving religion, it was just as if this weight had been lifted. There were so many contradictions within the faith that I think I had recognized even as a young child, that were just sitting there in the back of my mind and making me uncomfortable about the whole, about being religious in general. And suddenly, once I had left and I had acknowledged to myself that this really doesn't make sense, the world opened up. Intellectually, it just becomes it's a playground now, and there's so many things to explore. We don't know anymore what the truth is. We don't, this is something that we have to come to learn about in the universe. And it just became a challenge, and so much more fun and interesting to participate in the world. And also our behaviors in it, and our the ways in which we live our lives seem to me to be more consequential. And this might be counterintuitive, because a lot of people think heaven and hell, there can't be a bigger consequence than that. I think that's a very selfish way of looking at things. Like, so maybe consequences personally, but now that you know that there isn't a heaven and hell, and this is this one chance that we have to live our lives, to make a difference, that there is no ultimate justice out there waiting for us. Bad guys won't meet their end and get what they deserve at the end. And we need to make whatever justice we can in this world. Suddenly it became more important to act now, act in this world, and be a lot less complacent than I was when I was religious.
There are so many things that I want to say here. One of the things is that when I have these conversations very much about leaving faith and leaving Islam, the talk usually goes very much into what led to questioning and how the person was religious at some point and started questioning and this and that. And your process is different. I mean, you don't struggle in order to explain why you particularly why you believed so much in it and left it altogether. You have a very different approach, and I don't know. What you just said about the perspectives on heaven and hell reminds me so much of what I have been working on recently, which is the reason why people believe in what they believe in. When I look at Muslim community, for example. And I talk about why I left Islam, I so often hear this objection. Well, okay, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but do you really believe that you just came into existence out of nothing? And do you really believe that you are not going to go anywhere? What will happen to you when you die? And I'm working on this idea that the reason many people believe in what they believe is just the inability to grasp that reality will simply go on without them after they die. That is just so hard for them to understand. And also the idea that the good things they have done in life can remain unnoticed or unrewarded, while bad things terribly bad things that some people have done will remain unpunished, and people cannot really reconcile those ideas with their current ideas that justice must be served. Right.
So they can reconcile it technically. They just don't want to. It's so emotionally painful to think of the truth is, so there are a lot of emotional reasons why we don't want to re-examine religion. And honestly, this was something that really affected me after I left. A lot of people think about, there are a lot of stories that I hear about ex-Muslims and what happened to them when they left and how they felt about it and feeling isolated from their local community. And of course I had that too. But for me, the most painful bit was the fact that now there's no ultimate justice in the world. And it was a waking up, like for me, it's now I have to be an agent in the world. I have to be someone who makes this difference, who gets us a little bit closer to having justice in this world. This was really important for me to grasp it and to grapple with it. And it's still something I think about. It angers me and it fuels me to continue, waking up every day and doing the work that I do. But I think it's interesting to examine all the different ways in which emotions interrupt our rationality, and how much they get in the way of people accepting that Islam it isn't real. It couldn't have been real. And I think about that a lot because one of the goals that I have, with XMNA, we want to create a world in which dissent is a lot more normal within Muslim communities. So this means engaging with Muslims, but also we want more dissent. So that means convincing Muslims, speaking to Muslims directly. And because those are my goals, because that's the end game. This is why I do what I do. I have to think about efficacy as well. And I have to think about addressing those emotional needs and making and creating arguments like what you're thinking about what are the emotional hindrances and obstacles that prevent people from addressing these topics in a more rational way.
You started the Ex-Muslims of North America organization. When exactly did that start? What is that? 2013.
So we've been around. I can't believe it's been 7 years. That's crazy. Yeah, but 2013 is when we started the organization, and it was a lot more focused on community building when we first began, and our work has extended quite a bit since then, and we're thinking a lot more about outreach and education and even legislative advocacy work to whatever extent a nonprofit can participate in legislative work. So we've done documentaries. We did, I don't know if you're familiar with the Life Beyond Faith series. They're on on our YouTube channel, we interviewed a lot of ex-Muslims, and the idea was just to have these portraits of, what an ex-Muslim looks like, and to show the diversity of ex-Muslims, and to show the diversity of their journeys, and how they think about their place in the universe now. And because it became clear when we started XMNA and started meeting all the people that were ex-Muslims, is that there wasn't really a type. There were, ex-Muslims are quite diverse, and obviously there are things that we share in common, and there are perspectives on the world that we share in common. But the range of ages and experiences in terms of even religiosity, there were many ex-Muslims who just religion wasn't forced down their throat as much as others. And then there was many who were Salafis and Wahhabis and teachers of religion. And I thought that was just so fascinating that despite all this diversity, there's a lot of people who come to walk a very similar path. And the mini documentaries were to showcase this. And it was also because I was pretty frustrated with the way that I felt like we were being treated with the media. I felt like either it's this kind of an exploitative narrative of like these abused people, and it's this very sexy dramatic thing, or they just gloss over us and choose for political reasons not to look into the hardships of ex-Muslims at all. And so I wanted to tell our own stories. And once we had the means to do so, we started doing that. And then we did the Normalizing Dissent tour, and that's somewhat ongoing, where we went to lots of campuses throughout the United States and spoke to university students. And that's been pretty fun and pretty interesting. And again, just part of the whole program of speaking for ourselves, giving ourselves platforms, since no one else will give us platforms. So those are two big projects that we've been working on, and now there's a lot of other things that are happening, which I'm really, really excited about.
How much have you faced the whole the reactions of even Western? I don't want to label it. I don't want to label it as liberalism now. But you know what I'm speaking of. There is often a backlash when it comes to criticizing Islam or criticizing Muslim society. And as ex-Muslims, it is just completely natural that that our activism consists of criticizing exactly that. And in Western media and Western circles, there is often a backlash that we face for that. How much have you, as the organization Ex-Muslims of North America, received this backlash, or do you think you are a little bit more immune against that because you have more of a human rights cause behind you?
It's I would say both are true to some degree. With when I first started this activism, and now it's 2013, I can't believe it. Now it's just, now that we mentioned that date, I'm like, oh wow, it's been a long time. But when I first was speaking about these issues, there weren't too many other activists out there. Now it feels like there's just been this revolution. There's all these, it feels like a real growing movement, and there's so many ex-Muslims. I don't know who they are. I don't know, like they just crop up out of nowhere. It seems like. But when I was first getting on the scene, so to speak, there was like two of us, right? There was myself. Mariam was out there, Mariam Namazi, doing her own thing, but she didn't have as big of a platform either. And then there was just like Ayan, Hirsi Ali, and that was it. And then there was a cohort that was alongside with me that we sort of rose up a little bit as this second, wave that came up. And that's when we started to use the word ex-Muslim. Like even other than Mariam, no one even used it, and it wasn't as common as it is. And I had never heard of an ex-Muslim when I started up, and when we were founding the organization, we thought really hard about what we wanted to call ourselves. And we landed on, we were going to be ex-Muslim. I'm just going to be ex-Muslim North America. Now this is a template that's everywhere, and there's ex-Muslims of everything.
It has made such an impact. I think it's so important. I mean, that you did that. I think it plays a huge role in what has happened over the last few years in the rise of ex-Muslims.
It's absolutely. I can't even believe it sometimes. It just, because it looks like it's such a different atmosphere than the one that I encountered when I left. And there were a lot of pushback with the ex-Muslim label too. Even within the secular world, there were a lot of people who came up to us and said, "Isn't that antagonistic label.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of talks at that time about what we wanted to do, and we thought that strategically this is the way to go, and this is the label that we want to own. And yeah, so when I first started speaking up, I gave a talk. It was maybe my second like public speech anywhere, at the American Humanist Association's conference. It's called The Necessity of Liberal Critique. And that's more or less all I have to say on the topic of what's wrong with the left and what they need to change. And so I was encountering this kind of problem that you're referring to right from the get-go. As soon as we started being more than just a community organization, as soon as we started to actually speak up about the issues, speak up about the cause of our oppression, I started encountering pushback from fellow leftists and and progressive atheists, and so I did what I could, and I talked about it. It's been many years. I guess that was 2015. So it's been 5 years since I gave that talk, and I poured my heart into it, and I was like, this is all I have to say, and this will fix things and change things. But it really hasn't I think, changed that dramatically. There might have been, I think there has been a little bit of progress. However, I do think so. Because of the rise of ex-Muslims, I think the perception has changed a little bit. It used to be that all ex-Muslims are right-wing, and now it's, some ex-Muslims are right-wing, the bad ex-Muslims, and then there's good ex-Muslims. But it used to be the case that we were all bad, no matter what. Yeah. So the progress, incremental, it's tiny, but is better than nothing, for sure.
I find it so funny because I have some would say that I have a much more antagonistic approach to Islam and to Muslim culture and society. I don't know. Some people would say that I often see among ex-Muslims that the one criticism that people have of me is that I am too hostile, maybe, or too right wing, maybe. So, so the accusation that most ex-Muslims would be right wing, which I have also seen often before in left wing circles, is kind of a little bit ironic to me. It's a little bit inaccurate to me, a little bit weird to me. But I feel like there has been some progress. There has been some change. I mean, when I think back, just a few years back, I started doing what I am doing, my online activism, only 3 years ago. That was only on Instagram. That was very small. It was nothing at all. I had an Instagram profile. That's how I started. And back then, I remember that I used to get a lot of very terrible backlash from leftists in the West, especially in America. When I compare it to today, I feel like it's kind of diminished. It is not really there anymore as much as it was before. So something has already changed within only a few years, and that might be because we have been out there, because you have been normalizing dissent, as you called it, and we have been talking more and more about leaving Islam and the burden of it, and the reactions of Muslim society, the irony that we are treated terribly in the Muslim world, and then we receive backlash from supposedly human rights activists here in the West, and I believe it has changed something. You were also referring to the rise of ex-Muslims, how suddenly they pop up everywhere, and I remember. A few years ago when I started on Instagram, I remember it was just 3 years ago or so, and I couldn't see ex-Muslims anywhere. I mean, they were still very few. I saw the ex-Muslim titles. I saw them, appear here and there, but it was the number was so low. Even when I started my YouTube channel, which was just 2 years ago, it was so low. But today, only 2 years later, I go on Twitter, for example, and I see ex-Muslim
everywhere.
Everywhere. I can't believe how this happened, when this happened. And
it's very shocking to me, because you have to imagine, like, when I was getting, we didn't even like the label. We weren't even sure, is this what we want to use? What do we want to use? What word is there? What's the word we can use? Should we invent a new word? I mean, there were all these conversations, but now it's something that it's almost an identity that you can step right into, and we can discuss that might be maybe not a great thing, but in the long run. But there is a movement there. It feels real. I think having organizations, especially, really changes the appearance, at the very least, of strength in organization. we this is something I think we struggle with. A lot of movements struggle with right from the beginning, because you have a lot of activist excitement and vigor, and activists who want to speak and they want to say the things they want to say, and that is all wonderful. But you need organizations, you need stability, you need groups that are continuing to do a certain amount of work behind the scenes all the time that activists can tap into when they need to tap into them. And if you look at effective movements all across the world, or any specific kind of social movement, the gay rights movement, civil rights movement, organizations are they're key to harnessing those activists, getting them organized, moving forward towards policy goals that would protect the group and protect the movement. For example, one of the things that we've been working on with XMNA for several years now, and I think you might be familiar with this problem of Facebook groups of ex-Muslims getting banned. Because there's targeted harassment campaigns by Islamists, or just Muslims. Like, we don't even know if they're necessarily extremist Muslims who are doing this, but these targeted campaigns of getting these groups shut down. And of course, these groups are lifelines, and they're the beginnings of a real organization. You start off on the Facebook level, then that's where you foster something real until it becomes a formal organization, or or activists branch off from there. It's very important to have that space, particularly in Muslim countries, but it's just not something that they can rely on. So we've been working with, as a Secular Coalition for America, and a few other secular groups, to try and see what we can do to change this on a company level, to try and see what we can do to get Facebook to address this issue directly with their code, whatever's happening in the back end, to allow this to continue. We have to do what we can to fix it. So we've been working with the Secular Coalition to do that. We got the attention of some congressmen. There's a Democrat in California, Congressman Huffman, who thought that this was important and he wanted to address it. So we've been having a conversation. He wrote a bipartisan. He wrote a letter to Facebook directly, and a few other congressmen signed on to it as well. So it was actually a bipartisan letter. We had Republicans and Democrats to address this. It's an ongoing conversation, and we're hoping to get some real results. And in the end, ex-Muslims are a little bit more protected. And so when this is part of that work of building that foundation on which other people can stand. And it has to be a solid foundation. It has to be something they can really rely on and depend on. So this is part of the ethos, part of the mindset that I've been in for some time. And I mean, you mentioned that you haven't interacted with me and seen me. I've been somewhat hard to reach by design.
I realized that. I've interacted pretty much with every known ex-Muslim out there so far, but I struggle to have any connection with you.
I'm hard to reach.
The only time we actually interacted was trying to set this up. So I'm really glad talking to you here today.
Yeah. Well, it is by design to some degree, in the sense that I really value the behind the scenes work. It's always what I've been passionate about. And I think that's a really, really necessary work. Like if you think about we as individuals, like you and me, as people who want to make change in the world, what is the one lever we can pull that would make the biggest change, or it's the most necessary change to move other things along? From that perspective, I think building that organizational structure is the most important thing. And then once that's there, all these activists prop up. They're speaking and they're talking. And what's interesting is I'll see once in a while, I'll go on the ex-Muslim forum, like subreddit or whatever, just browsing, and I'll see it, and I'll notice that people take XMNA for granted a little bit. Yeah. Like they'll just be like, of course there's ex-Muslim organizations, here's our local one, and they talk about it in such a flippant way, which shocks me, because I remember when I could never take this for granted. And even now I don't take it for granted, even though I'm, leading this organization. I don't take it for granted at all. It's a very precarious position for me, but it's very comforting and sweet, actually, to see people think about it that way.
Yeah. Well, it is very important to I mean, there is the one phrase, as you say, we do it in the public. We make the public get used to hearing about ex-Muslims and the criticism of Islam. I am out there all the time. We are speaking to the public, but what you actually do behind the scenes is kind of what drives the change on a much more different level, which is great to see. I think when it comes to identifying as ex-Muslims, I kind of think of it as a phase. At some points in the past, I struggled. I thought, should I call myself an ex-Muslim or not? Should I even use that label or not? Because at some points I thought it sounds a little bit strange to me, and it also sounds like it reminds me of people who escaped cults who use similar titles. And I thought using the title ex-Muslim sounds like we left a cult. But then I thought, wait, but we did. So, yeah. But that's just me. But yeah, I think it's just a phase that we identify as ex-Muslims, and it is a significant phase because we need to make it more and more acceptable in the public that we are these people who left this religion, this untouchable religion, this religion that so many people, so many individuals and organizations want to make untouchable in the world, that is already untouchable in the Islamic world, but that they also want to make untouchable in the Western world, which is, I think, a very good reason to criticize Islam. We are here to show that we leave this and that this is normal, that this can be normalized, that this should be normalized, because there are blasphemy laws, there are apostasy laws, and here in the West, we should be able to have the freedom, the ability to go out and express ourselves, to exist as people who left Islam, because we cannot exist like this in the Islamic world. It just is not possible, and we need to make it possible there as well. And once it is more established, once we have established in society, in the world, the fact that people leave Islam and that these people have big groups and organizations, then maybe we can move on and just adopt a new identity and become different. But I think in the rise, in changing the world right now, the title ex-Muslim is very important and very it is very important. It has a huge impact, and that makes me so glad that people like you have chosen to use that term.
Yeah, so for me, it's definite. I see your point about it being a phase, and hopefully being a temporary. Like the what we want to get to is a world where it really is just a phase. But for me, I left that phase, the militant sort of the very angry ex-religious person phase. I left that behind a long time ago. And I think this has affected a lot of my approach to this issue. Just me as a person. This not happen to everyone. And there are a lot of people in XMNA who work, either staff members or people who work directly with us or on our board who do not share this background. But for me, by the time that I started XMNA, I had moved on already. I was no longer suffering directly from Islam. I had built another life for myself. I had separated myself from the family and the community that, they rejected me and I rejected them. It was kind of a mutual thing. And I started to build another life already. And it was the reason that we founded Ex-Muslims of North America was because we started to recognize when we were having these informal meetups that the other people there, the other ex-Muslims there, were suffering. They were really suffering. And for them, just this, they would drive 8 hours one way to go to a happy hour that would last an hour and a half, buy a hotel, stay the night there, and then drive 8 hours back the next day. It was crazy. I couldn't, I couldn't understand how someone could be suffering so much, and then there's just this need that is just not being addressed by anybody. So it became clear that for those of us who had successfully left and who have been able to build a life outside, we have a duty to help those who haven't, and to change the reality for them to whatever extent we can. So for me, this ex-Muslim label, it's very deliberate. It's due to my feelings about the activism, the activist work, and with what you mentioned, that we should be able to be ex-Muslims. This should be This should not be a crime anywhere in the world. And it's because it is that this is a label that I place on myself until such a time that we're not so heavily discriminated against.
Yeah, I want to clarify when I meant phase. When I said phase, what I meant is not it's not a phase on a very low level. It's not a phase on a personal level or anything at all. What I'm referring to as a phase is a much bigger thing. It's a phase in history. I consider it like the Enlightenment in the West. I consider it like I mean I would even go as far as to equate the whole ex-Muslim awakening, the rise of ex-Muslims to the Enlightenment, because that is basically that is what is happening. It has a huge impact. It has a huge impact on how we talk about Islam and how we talk about people who leave Islam. I mean, we are talking about something very significant. People often don't realize it, but we are talking about the permission for people who don't believe in something to exist and to speak in public. I mean, when I speak about apostasy and apostasy laws, I try to make this comparison and try to tell people, imagine, it might sound a little bit inflammatory to some people, but that's exactly the point. Imagine we had a dozen countries in which it was illegally forbidden, and even more countries in which it was culturally taboo and forbidden to be a Muslim. Imagine we had a dozen countries and more countries in which that was the case. How would the world react to that? What would we be doing right now? How would Muslims react to that? How would the United Nations react to that? What would we be doing about that right now? It would be very, very serious. It would be very damn serious.
Yeah, I actually posed that exact. I remember posing that exact scenario several times in speeches I gave, and on social media, like. Even years ago when things were slightly less inflamed, and I got a lot of pushback even there, which was so shocking to me that even bringing that up, it wasn't tolerable to everybody. But I mean, look, this is humans are hypocrites. That's just this is a problem of humanity. We tend to be hypocrites. We tend to be small-minded. We need activists and people who are thinking more deliberately and clearly to help us move forward, to help negotiate these sort of difficult political situations or social questions, and to move us forward. So there's a place for us here, and this is what progress means. This is what progress looks like. So I try to not spend too much time. And I used this has changed. My mindset has changed since when I first started, and when I gave that AHA speech. You can look it up. I was hurt and I was angry, and it came across in my speech there that I was hurt and I was angry. But I've sort of come to the conclusion now, it's not quite a conclusion. I'm still thinking about it, but to the viewpoint now that it's not worth the effort. It's not a good emotional exercise to even spend any time ruminating over how badly we are treated, right? Like I think let's bring it up once and then brush it aside, and continue on doing the work to change that reality. Because I think that it does make you feel hopeless about the world, which is not, I don't think it's the right mindset to put yourself in when you're trying to do this kind of work, because it feels hopeless. We are facing really incredible forces, really powerful forces, but that doesn't mean that we can't prevail in the end. That doesn't mean we're not having a big impact. I think, as you know, like this movement is radical. It's changing things on a very fundamental level throughout the world, and I don't think everyone recognizes. Actually, hardly anyone recognizes that. Even famous atheist activists don't recognize exactly what a devastating impact ex-Muslims are having in the Muslim, ideological space. I don't think they recognize that. I think very, very few people truly know it and feel it and can see the sort of seismic shift that's happening. To go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think, one of the ways of moving beyond just getting just being sort of reacting based off of our treatment or the political realities, is to move a little bit more deliberately. And from my perspective, that means I don't spend too much time anymore. I used to, but I don't spend too much time anymore talking about the left or the right. Even like I don't mess with these political labels too much. I don't. When I do speak about the left, I do speak to the left. I do try to change their minds, but I don't just go off about the left is like this or the left is like that, because I don't think it's helpful. Yeah. Right? It is true. It's true, but it's just not helpful.
Yeah, I stopped talking about the left specifically quite a while ago. I think I used to do that about 2 years ago or so. I stopped that. I also noticed that it is not always accurate to accuse that side of specific things. That's what I was talking about when I said that a lot has changed over the last few years. I see a lot of people on the left be very supportive of our cause, of our existence, of me as someone who criticizes Islam very fiercely, and so I would like to appreciate that more instead of
right. Yeah, and it helps. I mean, we were talking a little bit about the emotional obstacles that get in the way of people accepting, a truth or a more rational perspective. Keeping that in mind, we also have to, recognize that if we go on too long about the left this or the left that, there are leftists who are listening who might be open to our perspective, but the second that they hear that attack, then they feel it as an attack, even if it's not an attack, and even if it is true, their identity is defensive, and then now they won't. They're not as easy to reach as they would be if we just pointed to the specific problems rather than the groups that are perpetuating some of these problems more directly.
That's a perfect point. Actually, that's a good approach. I mean, you can always win over many more people by pointing out the problem than by directly attacking them and saying you are hypocrites.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and no one likes hearing it, even if it's true. No one likes hearing it.
Yeah, that is true. I believe actually that the rise of ex-Muslims and the impact it has is noticed in some circles. I noticed that there is among Islamic apologists, among certain Islamic apologists, there has been over the last few years an increasing amount of reaction of mentioning the rise of ex-Muslims, or maybe indirectly they just call it the fact that many people leave Islam, unfortunately, and that we need to do something about it. So whenever I see that, it makes me happy. I feel like, oh, good, that's awesome. I like that. I like the fact that these people are speaking about it, because it shows that something is happening. I'm also quite hopeful about the future. To be honest, I've said it before. I think within only a few decades, things will be so much better about all these problems that we are talking about. I believe within a century, within 2 centuries, Islam as a major force or a major problem will be diminished on a very big level. You might not agree with me, others might not agree with my analysis, but that's why I call myself a prophet. I like to make such prophecies. I believe that things will change greatly.
Yeah, I don't know, like in the sense that maybe you're right. I'm not a prophet.
Well, leave that to me.
Yeah, okay, will do. But I think it's so to push back a little bit. I think sometimes it's just not a good practice maybe to think too much about what will be, and to feel certain about it, because then if things start panning out, like if you start to see indications that maybe we're not moving in that direction, you lose hope. You start to reevaluate what you're doing and why you're doing it, because a minor setback made you feel as if maybe there's something about your prophecy is incorrect. I just think that there's a lot that we I believe above all in human fallibility and my own fallibility, right? So I can't predict the future. All I can do is continue to work towards a world that's better. And I remember like when Barack Obama was running for president, around the time that he was running. I mean, just a year before, or 2 years before, he gave this talk And it was like it was really impressive, and a lot of people were talking about it. And that's when the conversation first came up of him potentially being the president, or running for president or something like that. And even at that time, people thought it was crazy. People thought, just 2 years before, he was actually elected,
Yeah.
people thought it was crazy that a Black man could be president of the United States. They just didn't think now was the time. They didn't think that we were ready for it, but we were. It happened. And then once it happened, the atmosphere changed. Our understanding of what's possible in America changed. I think a similar thing happened with gay marriage. Up until it happened, actually, up until the day that we had gay marriage in the United States, I thought that America wasn't ready. Mm-hmm. And if you had asked me a few years before, I would have said it won't be ready for another 10 years, for another 15 years. So progress can happen slower than we think. It can happen a lot faster than we think. And the rate isn't in any way, one straight logical line. Sometimes there's some strange leaps that happen in one direction and another, and loop-de-loops that happen as well.
To be honest, I'm very confident about the way things change, about the way things change in the world in general, and the way things change in the Muslim world. I think I am so confident about it because, I mean, when you look at the greater change of society, of the human population over the last few centuries, you see that it has only been going faster and faster and faster. Of course, there might be some setbacks. There might be setbacks here and setbacks there, but it has been going so fast. If I have spent quite some time in Turkey, for example, which is I think a very important country to measure change, because Turkey is a very secular country. A very secularist country, but also a country that is under heavy Islamic influence, because it has always had a population that was extremely religious, or very religious, or very loyal to traditionalism and conservatism. But also a population that was always wanting to go into the future. And when I think about Turkey right now, I think Turkey leads a lot of change in the region. When I think about Turkey right now, I think a lot of stuff that was considered extremely taboo 20 years ago is completely normal today, despite the fact that that religious people, that a religious government has taken over and is currently leading the country, despite the fact that that it looks like from the outside that Islamists have kind of taken over and are now leading society and deciding what's happening. That is only what is happening on the surface. That is what's politically happening, because Islamists were, or religious people, let me say that, religious people were suppressed in the past, have regained power, but society is still changing for the better, as statistics show. And the same thing is kind of happening everywhere. Even when you see that that societies could be changing for the worse, what is actually happening is that the society is changing for the better. We see this in statistics regarding belief and disbelief in the Muslim world and around the world everywhere. We see this when it comes to tolerance and intolerance, racism, when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to homosexuality, and so many other issues. Especially when I look at the change of the Muslim population in the world to becoming more and more irreligious, or at least more tolerant of irreligion. I believe I'm not very far off saying that in the future, in near future, we will be the world will be much better when it comes to these issues. And I'm not saying this because I think we shouldn't do anything about it, because everything will be better anyways. I'm saying this because I think this should motivate us even more to participate in this great change that is happening. That is why I'm here. I mean, when a doctor comes and says, "Oh, things in medicine will be much better in 50 years," that doesn't mean that the doctors should now just lean back and start sleeping. It means that they should work and especially contribute to this great change that will happen in 50 years. And similarly, I think that a huge change is happening, and that we should be on the forefront, as we are, as you are, I would say, in bringing this great change that is happening. It is a hopeful thing that I say. It is I say it with confidence. I say it with happiness, with pride.
No, and I don't disagree with you in the sense that I do believe also, in that believe is an interesting word. I definitely hope that that's where it's going, and it seems as if that's where it's going. I don't know. And even when we're looking at this, I think it's just important to take the long, to look at the long range of history and try and change our scope a little bit. And I think that's the reason I said what I said before, is because I was cautioning in getting too involved in this is definitely what's going to happen, and feeling as if this is what's going to happen, and that you're going to see that change in your lifetime. Because what you might see in your lifetime is a complete reversal. You might see, and these are the lessons of the 20th century, when towards the end of the 19th century, we thought, that progress is progress, and humanity is evolving, and it's getting so much better, and there's certain things that some certain barbaric practices we were able to do then that we will not do now, and we've changed in some fundamental sense. But the 20th century was just an exercise in learning all the ways in which some of this progress and technology has led to more effective barbarism, more effective cruelty. And so what happened during that time in the 20th century, so many philosophers and theorists who lost faith in progress in the way, in this, because in their scope, in their lifetimes, they had seen this incredible leap backwards, and horror that they couldn't have even imagined previously that took place. So again, I agree with you that in a real true long arc, of the moral universe or whatever it is, it does bend towards justice. That's the quote, right? The arc of the moral universe bends towards is long but bends towards justice. Is that the quote? Exactly. I'm not sure. That's not the quote. Okay.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah. I don't know for sure, but it's an interesting way of looking at the world. But I do think that scope has to be long, and you have to acknowledge that it will be long. Otherwise, you'll get discouraged if you see a leap backwards in your lifetime.
I always think people should think much more in the long run. They should think much more they should look at a much bigger time frame and judge what is going to happen in the future or what happened in the past. Or I think if people looked at things that way, they would also realize that a lot of stuff that they believe in, especially when it comes to religious beliefs, is a lot of nonsense. Because I believe that is one of the problems of us as humans, that we like to think in short term, that we like to think what will happen in our time while we are alive. I don't think that I believe that there will be huge change while we are alive. Simply because over the last decades, progress has been skyrocketing. Development has been skyrocketing. I don't believe that all the things that I really want to see will happen in my lifetime, though, which kind of makes me sad, but it also makes me happy, because I know that things will change for so much for the better in the long run. Maybe in 200 years or more, I don't know. And I want to be a pioneer of that.
Or maybe it's going to be so much sooner. Maybe we have no idea. Maybe it'll happen before we. But I do think that there's a possibility, a strong possibility, that in the next 5 years, 10 years, this landscape, the social landscape of discussing dissent within Muslim communities, and the dominance of religion over the psyche of the average person is going to be impacted very directly by the rise of ex-Muslims within the households of Muslim families themselves.
Oh, and the internet is killing it. The internet is currently is a huge weapon that is helping us kill that, and it will become killed. Kill that is a very strong word. I'm very sorry about that.
That's all right.
We were having quite an optimistic discussion here.
Well, internet is killing a lot of things. Actually, I think I think that's the most interesting shift of our time. Maybe I think you can go back several centuries and say that the internet has been the most momentous change, and we don't yet know exactly how it's affecting us, which is the most interesting part of it.
It is the best thing that has ever happened to humankind, I believe.
Maybe the worst.
No, I truly believe with everything, with every bad aspect of it, it is still the best thing that has ever happened, and this is not even the beginning. I believe there'll be so much more, but I don't want to turn this into a whole sci-fi discussion now. So
sure.
Anyways, great things will definitely happen. What is your view on we talked about disagreements at the beginning of our conversation. I don't know. There are quite some things that we have in a friendly way disagreed on. But what is your perspective on Islam in general? How do you think Islam is different from other religion? What do you think about religion? What is your outlook on it? Do you want to go into it at all?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, so you mentioned this is possibly something we could be disagreeing on, and maybe it won't be as much of a disagreement as, yeah. Well, you know, I think my history affects a little bit of my approach to Islam as well. I'm not as angry with it in regards to Islam in the way that some ex-Muslims who are fresh off of the, you know, really suffering directly, regularly, and that makes perfect sense. And it doesn't mean that just because I have achieved somewhat of a distance over the direct abuses of the religion that my view is correct. If anything, maybe my view is less correct. Maybe I should be more angry in my approach. But I look at the religion as somewhat what you and I were discussing earlier, and that it's sort of this. It's a meme that helps people organize, helps people understand the world. It was definitely an effective meme. So I don't think of it in terms of getting us any closer to truth. I think of it as something that was an effective way for humans to organize. And certainly Islam was an effective way for Arabs to organize and conquer. And they did that, and they did it well. And so one can argue that within that stage of development, Islam was, one can argue, right? I'm not really necessarily arguing this, but one can argue that in that stage of development, Islam was a step forward for the pagans who were very, very, they were not organized very well. They weren't working cohesively together. And partially because they couldn't, because they didn't share enough values, deep values that would require that level of cohesion. Islam forced that cohesion onto a civilization. So from a purely academic perspective, I have a very different approach to religion. And in fact, I've actually seen in conversation with ex-Muslims that I can see that even in these everyday conversations, I can see remnants of this, of symptoms of this deep disagreement of what the religion is. In that I see people say things like, religion is meant to control people, or Islam is a way to control people. It's people's minds, it's a way to control your mind. It's like mind control. There was a time where I was more sympathetic towards that view. And now I don't look at it in that view as directly, in that it implies a designer. Like it implies that it's controlling by design. And I don't think it's that way. I think it's like a meme. I think it's like a virus. It spreads because it's effective, not because there's necessarily mustache twirling villains at the top that are using it to control people. That's my view there of Islam.
I have to be very honest. This makes me want to go into another 2-hour discussion with you about what religion is and what Islam is, because of course we're not going to do that. I'm just kidding. But this is I think the closest that I've ever someone else heard speak about how I think about religion and the concept of Islam together. I often hear people speak about how religion was made to control people and how Islam is there to control people, and I don't agree with that. And I think I usually say, no, it's not that intelligent. It
wasn't made.
Yeah,
it might have come together. It might also function in that way.
Yeah,
it was not made to be. It wasn't made by anyone, by anything. Made by the forces of evolution and civilization dominance, maybe.
Yeah, people weren't sitting at the top and were thinking, okay, we need something to control society, so let's make this and let's make that. That's not how it happened. I mean, that's what some people might like to see it well, how some people might like to see it, but that's not really how it happened. It just happened, as you say, as a meme, and that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that something that created religious belief is the mere inability to understand that when you die, it's just that's just it, and people will just go on living without you. I believe this is not even only about religion. This also affects many of our secular views. If you see in the world movements of people who believe, for example, who take climate change on such a to such a different level, where they believe, oh, we will all gonna die soon, the world is going to end soon, within a few decades, everything is going to be destroyed. But that I think, for example, comes from the same nature, that something terrible must happen in your lifetime, because the world and humanity cannot just go on existing without you for millennia after that. It's just something difficult to grasp. I think that is one huge motivator behind why people believe in what they believe in, and why they don't want to let go of what they believe in. You want to say something?
I think there is something. I mean, there you actually touched on two issues that are worth separating out for the purposes of this discussion, which is that there are human behaviors, motivations, tendencies, let's say tribalism, or tribalism is actually a really good one from this perspective, that feed into dogmatic religious behaviors, even if there isn't a religion. And that could be, secular religions, political religions. And so they are all those pseudo religions or what have you, these ideologies that act as religions are also building upon, and using those same human tendencies, weaknesses in our development in our mental states, to spread and to organize. So that's one. And then there's that, I think, the more fundamental question that you were touching on, that is religion specific, which is the existential anxiety that we have as humans. That is something that religion in particular covers, and it covers well. The fact that we just won't exist. That's a very hard thing for people to come to terms with. And religion is something that is, this is why it's so effective, because it harnesses all these other human traits that we have, this tribalism, this what have you, and combines this with this surety that you will exist sometime, after you die, which is what makes it so potent, and what makes it such a good meme. When we're speaking in this way. I do think, though, when I think about, some people think that, and maybe you're one of those people who think that this is why religion might always exist.
No, I don't.
Because of okay. All right. So. Yeah, I think some people, I've had conversations with people who thought that existential anxieties will always exist.
I know that many people think that way, that it will always exist. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that I don't know exactly how I feel about that. Of course, you can't predict the future. I think that we will become better at managing existential anxieties, even if they might not disappear entirely. What's fascinating is that, we're the only animal, right, that has existential anxieties in that direct way. Like, do dogs know that they're going to, when they die, have they grappled with the fact that when they die, they're not going to be, the world will exist, but they will not be here? Like, does any other animal grapple with it? I think, as far as we know, it's not the case. That no one else has existential anxieties. So I think it's that particular motivator that's very interesting. But I'm an optimist. So if human beings can be the first animals to invent and to come across an existential anxiety, why can't we be the first to overcome it? I like to believe in some form of transhumanism, where this is where we're really getting real sideways. No, not in the weird sense. I just simply believe that I like studying psychology, and I believe that humans would possibly, not even too far in the future, come to a level where they would be able to preserve their existence by preserving their brains, for example, and creating creating a virtual reality, or even beyond that, preserve their brains in bodies that can be created. So it's something that science quite confirms for the future to happen.
Fascinating, yeah.
And that could actually be a complete solution to the problem. Not a complete solution to the problem, but kind of a solution to the problem. Anyways, more to that in our next episode, where we will discuss sci-fi in reality. Yeah. But yeah, coming back to Islam, I think that Islam is I think that what makes Islam so different is that Islam has the same quality of people wanting to believe certain things, people believing certain things, people repeating certain beliefs, repeating certain sentences and rituals and symbols, sacred acts, and believing in a certain thing. What I think makes Islam so different from all of that, though, is that Islam was set up within a very, very brief time frame into a society that was also established by a person as a state religion very quickly, which didn't really happen with all the other religions as far as we know them. What also happened is that it has a scripture that is claimed to be directly spoken by the Almighty Creator of the universe in the moment, directly given to this guy who established the religion there within just a few decades. And while establishing it, and especially after establishing it, they also spread it to the rest of the world and made the world basically forcibly accept this religion. And I think what makes Islam so different from all the other religions is simply that Islam is the last, the biggest, most problematic form that religion has taken, in that it is not only the meme, not only the belief in people's minds, it is directly an established political system that you cannot defy, which is why we are sitting here today talking about the rise of ex-Muslims. Right.
Well, I agree with much of that, but there was something that you said, and now I moved directly off of I remember.
Forget it.
I think the Torah, God is directly talking to us, right? Or is that not?
No,
am I wrong?
He's not directly talking. He's just inspiring. I mean, the belief is
even in the Torah.
Well,
the first 10 books, yeah.
No, the Torah. So the first 5 books of Moses.
The first 5, yeah.
The 5 books of Moses it is believed were written by Moses with God's inspiration. So God talks to him, and Moses writes down as God talks.
I mean, is that what the Quran is to some degree as well? No, God didn't write it.
No. And the Torah is also not. No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean, but it's.
But just my only point was just that with those first 5 books with the Torah, but the rest of it, I think you're right that it's not a direct word in the way that the Quran is, and that gives it a little bit of level of flexibility that we don't have with our scripture. And I think you are right that it presents a different problem, at least on a political level, or at least from a civilizational advancement level. So it's very good at doing what it needed to do when it first came upon the scene, but then soon the reality of the world changed, our economic systems changed, people started demanding equalities, rights and dignities on another scale, and Islam is, I think, less able to provide them because of the ways in which it demands political participation and involvement in the political space. So I do think that changes Islam a little bit and should affect our approach to it. I do think, though, that makes it a weaker religion in a lot of ways. I mean, I think once going back to the scope of scaling back and looking at things from a broader level, you can say that Christianity died in the West, but it is still, the ghost of it is there and might always be there. And so much of the foundations of Western thought are still influenced by Christian perspectives. This is what Nietzsche was saying with, God is dead, but he was frustrated by the idea that God is dead, but we're all still Christians. um, and so that I think in some ways Christianity as a belief system, as a meme, will outlast Islam.
I believe so too.
Yeah, because Islam doesn't bend, but that means that it breaks more easily.
Yeah. I think of it as Islam is the most powerful religion. I think it is the most powerful religion when it comes to. I'm talking of actual power, not of being powerful in the minds of people. I'm talking about actually having very powerfully established traditions, a powerful approach to converting people, a military in controlling people, and Christianity is much more liberal in that sense, fundamentally more liberal. I wouldn't say it wasn't necessarily historically always more liberal. I'm saying fundamentally more liberal. Judaism is much more different anyways from all of that. But I think since Islam has such a strict approach to society and to conversion and deconversion, I believe, as you said, it cannot be easily changed, which is why with the progress of humankind, it will break and fall very, very brutally.
Well, I mean, that's what I think. And the one counter, I guess, to just play devil's advocate against my own argument is that a lot of Islam is appealing to people who are reacting against some of the more extreme symptoms of modernity. That is to say that there are some people who are affected by the loss of rigid social structures. And I talk to a lot of converts, and especially convert women, and they'll specifically say that this was an appeal that Islam had for them, that it had these rigid social structures. Often they came from broken homes, or they felt abused in one way or another, and Islam gave them this structure that Christianity didn't have, that modern secular Judaism definitely doesn't have. And then you can say Orthodox Judaism does, but how do you convert to that easily? You don't. So Islam was provided this shelter against these forces in a way that they felt like other religions did not. And it's actually very interesting to take a look at how in this modern world we have so much choice, and we see that as an ultimate good, just to have as many choices as possible. Yeah. And I see it as an ultimate good, right? I'm one of those people. But there's we have evidence to show that psychologically humans aren't necessarily more satisfied when they have more choices. Humans don't necessarily have more happiness when they have more choices. So I mean, it just all goes back to what is the ultimate goal of all this, and why is it that is the goal to be more happy? Is the goal to be more satisfied, or is the goal to be more free or closer to the truth of the universe, whatever that means?
Yeah. Well, I believe, to be very honest, when I think about how Islam is appealing to some people who find society problematic or who find their lives problematic, I would think it's a more personal symptom. From my experience, from what I have seen, I know that many people who convert to Islam because their own life was problematic or because they found society problematic, they go through a phase, and not much later they change into the more moderate, the more popular kind of Muslim, or they leave Islam altogether.
Sure. So I was just using the converse to illustrate that appeal is strong enough. So that appeal is also existing in the minds and hearts of Muslims as well, who might feel a similar way. And I think that helps us understand a little bit of what we see with second generation Muslims in the U.S. and the United States. One piece of a very big puzzle there, that there are these forces that they're also reacting against. Very interesting, because sometimes I listen to lectures by Muslims and convert Muslim women, these like white ladies we're talking about, and the lecture will be all about consumerism and how living a shallow life is bad, and and the lecture, I'll agree with 90% of it up until the last 10 when they say, well, the solution to an empty life of material goods is Islam. but right, this is just going back to what those these other needs and human desires that religion satisfies, and that was just my devil's advocate argument that Islam continues to address some human concerns and needs that other Abrahamic religions, at the very least, don't do as effectively.
Yeah. As a result, I believe humans essentially want to be more happy and more free, and they want to keep up with the progress, which is why the Muslim world is changing, and why Islam will eventually change too, and it will die. I'm sorry. But that's
well, you're the prophet.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Just kidding. Okay, I believe that's all. Is there anything you want to add to any of this? Is there any message that you want to give to people? Anything more that you want to say?
I just would like to encourage people to visit exmuslims.org. We are the largest organization of that's serving ex-Muslims. We're doing a lot of work that's unique and different, and we're coming up with a lot of interesting new projects this year. Please support us, support our work, even if it just means signing up for the mailing list and being aware of our campaigns when they come out and helping in those little ways. All of that is very helpful. So I would just encourage people to go to our website, sign up for our mailing list, and just keep in touch with what's going on.
Okay, support ex-Muslims of North America. It drives great change. It is very important, very crucial to everything we're doing. Very crucial to everything that I'm doing as well. Very, very much connected, and awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming here. People can find you on Twitter, I believe. Your Twitter is quite active at points. What's your Twitter handle again?
Sarah the Haider. So it's my name with the in the middle of it.
That's nice. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really liked having you here. I hope to speak to you again in the future, although you are very hard to reach. But thank you so much again. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And everybody, thanks for being here. I'll see you again in the next episode and in everything else that I do all the time anyways. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening, and have a fantastic day, and stay away from Islam.